welcome back to Book Banter. Today we're speaking with Heather Webb, a USA Today best-selling author and award-winning author of several historical novels. Her most recent novel, Queens of London, is inspired by the very real all-female gang named the 40 Elephants. She lives in New England with her family, a mischievous kitten, and one feisty rabbit. Please welcome Heather Webb to Book Banter.
Hi.
Hello. So good to see you.
Yeah, nice to see you again. I need to update that bio because my poor little rabbit has perished.
Oh,
He was no, it's okay. He was 7, so he had a
wow.
Good run.
That's a good run for a rabbit.
Yeah.
And your kitten is that one of Stephanie's?
Yes, so I have 2 now. I have 2 cats and no rabbit. And the second
Numbers
one, who's still a kitten, is from Stephanie Dre, who fosters kitties. Yeah.
Yeah. That's an ambitious hobby.
Yes,
kittens.
It is. I mean, she doesn't have children, so I think that helps.
That helps. Yeah, absolutely. Because you put the 2 together, and that's a whole different ballgame.
It's a lot. Although author Mary Kubica, she fosters cats and has kids, so I don't know.
Oh, wow.
I don't know how she does that.
I don't know how she writes.
Right. That's the thing. Yeah.
You always wonder, right? Like it's such a finite amount of hours in the day. Nobody gets extra. So,
yep.
So let's first talk about this beautiful cover. It's so beautiful.
I love it.
So great.
Source books, both of my last 2 books, actually all 3 of my last books, I've just loved the covers. I've gotten really, really lucky. They've given me top designers, I guess, because they're stunning. And I feel like they're not just colorful and pretty, but they have a unique quality to them too.
That's it. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. I agree, because it's not like anything else you see out there. That's what I love about it. It just really, and it pulls you in. I mean, even with, Ben in the background there.
Yeah.
But I'm going to point out the knife now that you mentioned it.
Yes.
There's a knife in her hand.
And when I asked for them to add the knife in her hand, they actually made the font of the title bigger to partially hide it. They're like, we don't want it to seem like it's a murder book. Oh, okay, I get that, because it's not.
It's not a murdery book, but the knife is very, very symbolic, and it actually is the start of my questions. So,
great, let's do it.
So your first line is just fabulous. I love it. I was like, it literally inspired my First Line Fridays on social media, because I was like, oh yes, we're going to do this now.
Thank you. It was very simple. Did
it just pop into your head? Like it just...
well, should we say what it is?
Yes.
What the first line is? And I don't remember because I changed it a couple times. Alice wiped her knife clean.
Yeah.
So I like a first line to either... I like all of them to set a tone, but sometimes a first line doesn't set a tone, but at least it reveals something really important about the main character. So those are my 2 favorites. Like I like to, a setting with a tone or the character in sight. But of course, there's a million ways to write a first line, and they can all be effective if you're careful and put a lot of thought into it. So no, it didn't come to me immediately. I actually usually I have a first line before I even start writing a book, and I never change it. Isn't that strange?
That's fantastic.
But this time it didn't happen. It definitely changed a few times. So I think it was even my last draft.
Really?
That I added that in at the last minute. I thought, what's going to grab somebody, and what really says who Alice is, in a very quick way. Yeah.
Yeah. In a very, very concise way. You're like, well, who doesn't want to read more? Like, really, like, what do you mean, Alice? First of all, Alice. So she's a woman. She wiped her knife clean. What did she just do with it?
Right.
Was she chopping tomatoes, or was she? And I was like, oh, okay, I'm in. And it just literally, like, it grabs you by the throat and you just go with it. So fabulous job. I loved it.
Thank you.
I've only started really focusing on those first lines, like as an exercise in writing, and I really get excited about them now. Like they're just
It's just a fun thing to do, isn't it? To make it like a really sharp hook.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
So another thing I do is the last line of every chapter I look at again in my last round of edits just to see if it, acts as a good segue to the next chapter, or
Yeah.
as like maybe there's a really thoughtful statement there, or maybe it's cliffhanger. So I always kind of look at those too. But that's later drafts.
Yeah, because at first you're telling yourself the story, and then
Right,
you're rounding it out. And
right.
but I agree. And if you can't have the same thing for each beginning, each ending.
No,
because
definitely not.
It gets boring.
Yes,
oddly, even a great line gets boring if it's
Yes.
repetitive, right? So yeah, I thought it was fantastic. So good job.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
How many drafts do you usually write?
I'm sorry, what was that?
How many drafts do you usually write?
How many drafts? It does vary depending on my timeline, like deadline.
Yeah.
Because I'll go through it ad nauseum, honestly. But my general, I would say, generally between 8 and 12, somewhere in there. Yeah, I tend to write like a builder. I lay a foundation, so it's a very lean first draft. Like no one should ever read my first draft ever. No one should read my second draft, and my poor betas read my third. But at least it's been through a couple of rounds, so it's not as rough. But yeah, each draft I look for something specific to pay attention to, focus on.
Yes.
And go all the way through, pull it all the way through that draft. So I end up doing a bunch of drafts. So
that makes sense. That makes sense, because it's hard to keep too many things in your head at once.
It's impossible. It's impossible.
And then you end up going back and forth and flipping between, and something inevitably.
You can't remember what you wrote in or what part. Yeah, it becomes kind of a chaotic thing instead of I try to apply structure to a very kind of creative, nebulous, sometimes chaotic process. And I think that working in drafts like that, looking for specifics with each draft really helps me. So
that makes sense. Yeah, that makes complete sense to me too. I like the static approach as well. I like structure.
Yeah.
Type A is like putting up their hand. Very nice. The Queens of London it's really like, the word that came to me was like, it's a rollicky good story. Like it is like the up and down and all around and twisty turns. But what makes it really special is that the history meets fiction in such a way that it's gripping, and yet you're learning so much along the way.
Well, that makes me happy.
I love, I learned more about history through novels than I ever did in school. And
right. And, some like historians often get up in arms, and nonfiction writers, about that because they think, we do change some things, or we put our own slant on things. But so do biographers. They put their own slant even on a system of facts, But that my goal isn't to have everything perfectly right. It's to kind of inspire the reader to want to go look up more,
Exactly.
So,
that's exactly it. Yeah. It's if you can take somebody from the book to Google, you've done your job. They want to know why.
Absolutely.
And I think that's pretty cool, actually. How did you come across Diamond Annie, Alice Diamond? She had a few names.
She did. So, I don't recall what I was reading about, but I was researching something else completely for a different book. And there was one line in this article about the Victorian all-female gang that would sew giant pockets into their pantaloons and petticoats and go into the store and descend like locusts and clear out the shelves in minutes, and how they would run these elaborate cons. And I just went, oh my God, what is this? This is fascinating. I've never heard anything about a female gang.
No.
and especially one that started as far back as the Victorian era. So I just saved the couple of lines from that article onto a blank document
Oh,
and
yeah,
stuck
yeah,
it in my book ideas folder for another time. And when I was finishing up the next ship home, I kept
yeah.
thinking about it. And so I thought,
Ah,
I should probably start researching and see if there's enough of a story there, because
right.
I really liked it, and I did. So there's not a ton out there about the gang, but there's just enough that
Yeah.
I could, piece together a story. Especially when I discovered Lillian Wiles, who's the first female
Yes.
detective at Scotland Yard.
So
Yeah,
cool. I love that how they play off each other and in like
yeah,
both sides of the law essentially. But it's
yeah. My goal there was to show that, they were both kind of after the same thing in many
yeah.
ways, even though it was opposite sides of the law.
Yeah.
The goals were similar. They're helping women have a better life, sort of elevating the lives that they were
Yeah.
living, and expanding their empires, so to speak. For Lillian, it was to try to get the government interested in female police and believing that they really brought something to the Metropolitan
Yeah.
Police there in England. And for Diamond Annie, it was to expand her empire to make more money.
Yeah. Yeah.
And steal
Steal.
more,
Steal.
have more, yeah, and also look
Yeah.
out for the girls, because that's what gangs do. They look out for their
Yeah.
own.
It's like a found family.
It is. It
Yeah,
is.
of
Yeah.
sorts.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I love that she also, because if she was raised that way, that's all she would know.
Yeah.
And so, but she still knew enough that she wanted to get out of the situation she was in. So, but she did it in the trade that she was taught.
That's exactly
So,
right. By 14, she was getting arrested. So, yeah.
it's absolutely crazy, and it's what's cool about it though is that it's got such a modern day vibe, because I would never have guessed in a million years that there was a gang of thieves that were shoplifters. Because when I think of female criminals throughout history, it's crimes of passion, crimes of the heart. They're but the 40 Elephants were like a profit seeking organization,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
and on their own, which is stunning. And then I was like, okay, wait, was there more of these? Did you come across any others that?
Yeah, actually, there were a lot of smaller female gangs that weren't as well organized and that had really short lifespans. They would kind of spring up and they would be together for a year, or several months, or maybe even a few years. But none of them really. There weren't enough of them that had enough staying power. They didn't have enough leadership like Diamond Annie, and that's why I decided to set this during 1925, because Alice, her real name, was at the height of her power in 1925, and I thought that would make it cool. Her
Yeah.
arc is fairly tragic. So
Yeah.
when you're writing a tragedy, that's very often where you begin with the main character, is when they are really coming into their own.
Yeah.
And then you go from there. So, and she had a lot that she was trying to prove at that point. So
it's absolutely fascinating, because she was also probably in this feeling of being threatened as well. Like, like somebody else is going to come and take over my turf, my gang, right? Like, it's very sort of grassroots level of threats. Like,
there were a lot of threats, and in fact, I allude to that some with the bob-haired bandit, who was a real thief.
Oh, really?
She had a Bonnie and Clyde thing with her boyfriend. That I mentioned the boyfriend in the novel, and how they were doing a smash and grab style, which really irritated Diamond Annie, because she was really smart. She had all that street smarts, but she's one of those people that if she'd ever had someone give her a book, she would have been a really brilliant, like well-rounded woman. She had a lot of innate intelligence, and so she was insulted by this smash and grab garbage. It's so much easier to be caught that way.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. That makes complete sense. Easier to be caught. And she finessed like the whole thing. She planned it. She had how do you go into a department store and clear everything out while it's open.
So that's what those pockets in their dresses, where they came in handy. And some of them would, take things to the dressing room, a bunch of things at once, and slip them under their clothes. I mean, they didn't have tracker tags like they do now.
Right.
So there was a lot of that going on, stuffing them into their bags. But to do that, they had to usually distract the salespeople, because those people were looking out for these women at this point.
I bet.
And then some of them were like, Diamond Annie was very recognizable by 1925. Like, people were afraid of her. They'd see her and they'd be like, "Yikes, I'm out of here." She was 5'9", which is so funny because that's my
tall
height.
you're 5'9". Lucky you.
And back then, I mean, the average male was 5'6". So she was really like,
she's
a presence. But they would distract the salespeople with all their this was part of their cons, and then the others would make out the front door with all the goods.
That's just
so, yeah.
It's mind-boggling to like that they could run something like that for so long and get away with it. It's fascinating. No wonder you were hooked. Like,
and I always like a character that's a little, I don't know how to put this, maybe a little gritty. I often like glamour mixed in too. So, I write
both
grit glamour, where it's a mashup of the two, because I find the juxtaposition really interesting.
Totally.
And I mean, so.
Well, that's actually one of the things that I thought was pretty fascinating, was that it's tough to write characters that are a little rough around the edges, but they're also very fun to write. But it's difficult to really understand if readers are going to connect with like a criminal as a female, especially. Like it's a weird thing that we all kind of go, oh yeah, a man can be a criminal, and that we all believe it, like without a lot of convincing. But for a woman to be such a well-organized criminal could be hard. It could be hard.
It's true. I think that female readers, for whatever reason, are harder on female characters that are doing things, making poor choices, I'll say. Or making choices different from what they would make. And that's funny to me, because men don't have the same hangups, but women really judge each other.
We do.
And it's harmful. It means that a lot of times a publisher will say, this character's not likable. She's coming off really, bratty, or I just don't like her. And it's, I write characters sometimes that aren't likable per se.
Yeah.
But you have to work at making them sympathetic. And I think they're not the same thing. And that's kind of what I aim to do. And you would know that as a writer.
They're fun to write, because you have to step out of yourself to really figure out this alter ego kind of thing of a nasty character. But at the same time, you've made her brilliant and aloof, but also very, very human, which is fascinating to me, because like we're not all cookie cutter. We have these all the edges, and you did such a great job with that, because she is likable. Like, even though she's stealing like crazy and can sometimes be cold, and then she wields her knife, and she's not exactly baking cookies for the Christmas concert, but but she is likable. So she's I don't know how you do that. How do you balance that human side with her illegal actions? Because
I think you show their disadvantages and you show their pain. The one thing that every human can relate to is pain.
Yeah.
And so if they are in pain in some way, or they are struggling with their faults and trying to overcome them in some way, I think that's where the humanity comes in. And that's very relatable. All of us have tried, to kick a bad habit, for example.
Yeah.
And so I think that's kind of where that humanity lies.
That's a very good answer. That's a very good answer.
Why, thank you. You can tell that I probably probably that I teach a lot of fiction craft stuff.
That's helpful, I bet, because you
It
can
is helpful.
probably look at your own with different eyes.
Yes, to some
Yeah.
degree. I mean, we all need other readers, but
Oh gosh, yeah, yeah. I'm amazed at how many things I'm blind to in in a draft. Like, huh? Who wrote that? Because that's not what I was thinking. It's quite funny. But the flip side is that Lillian Wiles, the Metropolitan Police Officer. Again, she was based on the real person.
yes.
One of the first female police officers in UK history. So having that side of the story was such a great alternative, but like you say, both striving to make a difference in the lives of women, which I think is fascinating, because at the end of the day, the human needs are very, very similar. We all want the same
They
thing.
are. They're the same. Human needs are the same. We all want love. We all want shelter. We all want more than we have. These are all, very typical human traits and human needs. Alice Diamond was not some huge champion of women, like Lillian was.
Right.
But she took care of her own.
Yeah.
And on occasion, if there was a female at severe disadvantage and she could help, she would. So
that's kind of interesting.
And often to her benefit, she'd bring them into her fold. Now you owe me. Yeah. Which is exactly what happened with the police officer when she saved her. It was like, okay, now you owe me.
Yeah. And that's it's like she literally herself is that double-edged sword.
Yes.
Like she lives on that line, and it's quite remarkable, actually, because it's brilliant. And I'm curious if through the history of researching women in law enforcement, was there a lot of them coming up through the ranks, or was it really a slow trickle like I think it was?
So it started with a group of volunteer police, and I apologize about this lighting. I have ring lights. I've so much light in here, 2 huge windows, but I think the camera in this laptop is weird, so it keeps adjusting.
Oh, don't you love that? Yeah.
So it's a little bit dark, and I need to figure that out. I might need to get a little separate camera, but that's a side note. So the female police started as a group of volunteer women who were trying to help the girls that were being trafficked to soldiers during World War I. During World War I, there were makeshift military camps set up in the parks in London, which was shocking to me. I'd never heard such a thing. And so they set up this volunteer service. They created a uniform. They worked very closely with the women's rights movement. It was a lot of the same women.
Yeah, makes sense.
And which makes sense, right? So, but the problem was they didn't have any power. They didn't have the power to arrest. They didn't have any backing from the government. They got made fun of constantly. And so at some point, the government realized that they were really helping take care of looking out for these other women, and that maybe they should give them a chance. And it was through a lot of pushing and hard work and pitching and all that of very powerful societal women that kind of forced their hand. And so the Metropolitan Police created this squadron of women, and there were 100 of them to begin with.
Oh, wow.
They still did not have the power of arrest, but they were official police with a uniform that was similar to the volunteers, but it wasn't the same. And then it created all this confusion on the streets, which was a nightmare. And so the volunteer squadron disbanded. And then the real group was whittled down from 100 to only 20. And this is yes. So they're just kind of like, they're not making any headway. No, people are making fun of them. They're not taking them seriously. They're making a mockery of us.
Right.
Which is such garbage, but that's some typical old school male thinking, right? So finally, these other women that remain there were petitioning for the power of arrest. They're like, of course they're making fun of us. We have no power.
Yeah, exactly.
So that got changed. So in 1925, the year that this book that takes place, is when we're down to 20. They've had the power of arrest for, can't remember exactly. It took 7 years to get it. So it was fairly recent. I think it was even that year, potentially. Don't quote me on that, but it's somewhere around that time. And Lillian, our detective, is intent on making sure that the rest of them aren't cut, that they don't close the program entirely, the squadron entirely. So she needs a big score.
Oh, okay. I see.
And she is out to prove something about women in the police department, and she gets busy, goes to work.
And that's pretty phenomenal, actually, because when you think about how do you go out without any power like that? With no power to arrest, then what do you do? Like, I guess all you can do is appeal to the women.
Well, right. And exactly. And I think there's a lot to be said for, if they gave them any kind of shelter and food and stuff like that, help them get a job placement, that kind of thing.
Right.
Then they were less likely to go get money from the soldiers for, prostitution, essentially. So they operated in a lot of ways like a charity.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, part of me kind of laughs to myself. I mean, I have a really good teacher voice. Even if I didn't have the power of arrest, I used to be a high school teacher and a track coach, and I'm a mom of teenagers.
Yeah, that'll do it. You're qualified.
Maybe break out the teacher voice. So I think there are probably there's the women that were drawn to this were women who weren't afraid to be, commanding when they needed to be.
So and you would have to be in that situation.
You would, and you can really sense about someone's presence if they have that kind of power about them.
That's true. So that's very true.
So so our poor Lillian has got a lot to prove, and this is when she goes head to head with Diamond Annie. Now, I must tell you that in real life, and I do detail this in the author's note, she absolutely knew who Diamond Annie was. I'm sure they crossed paths, but she wasn't. They didn't actually have that tete-a-tete. But it made for a pretty great story.
Absolutely. And I think that because it would have been realistic that they crossed paths and were aware of each other. I mean, with only 20 female police officers on the force, it wouldn't have been difficult for them, the gang, to know who's who.
And she worked in the West End and in central London, and that's exactly where the gang would go to pilfer goods. So it'd be impossible for her to not cross paths almost,
That makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes complete sense. And I have to ask, what is the difference between the Metropolitan Police and Scotland Yard? Are they intertwined, or?
Scotland Yard is really the bureaucracy. It's the office building.
Oh, okay. So it's like headquarters.
The police themselves, yes. Okay. Yes. So the police themselves are, they have stations all over the city.
Okay.
But Scotland Yard is like the stronghold office building, the head honchos are there, and not like the chiefs of police, but like the
politician type levels.
Yeah, like the higher ups detectives are there.
Okay.
Because they're not out. I mean, they're in the field, but not in the same way that the police are. It's a really different. There's like this big dichotomy. It's kind of like in the military, officers versus the enlisted in some ways.
Oh, okay.
Upper echelons of officers.
Okay, that makes sense. Because
there's probably more differences that I don't know the nuances to, but yeah.
Well, you hear a lot about Scotland Yard, like in movies and books and things like that. You hear it referenced, and so you always kind of think of, like you say, that big metropolis. But then when you were referencing the Metropolitan Police, I was like, oh wait, is it the same thing? And I wanted to make sure.
The actual people,
the doers,
right? Soldiers.
Yes. Yeah. The ones who are out there walking the street, and that makes sense. Now, does that the area, the sort of the seedy area of London where Diamond Annie and her gang hang out, is that still exist as such today, or has it evolved?
You know what? It's not. I did a very thorough, long couple of days of walking those neighborhoods. I brought a friend with me because I thought probably
Yeah.
don't want to be in this area alone if in fact it turns out to be kind of seedy. But
Yeah.
the thing is the center of cities, they're so gentrified these days. No one can afford to live there. So
No.
particularly, people of less means. And so
Yeah.
I mean, it's a little bit cheaper. They're all south of the Thames. So you have the Thames River
Okay.
that bisects the city. You've got
Mhm.
North London where, Mayfair and Kensington are. And then there's East London that's, north of the Thames. And then south, you've got Bermondsey and Lambeth and Southwark.
Okay.
And those neighborhoods are still less expensive and a little bit rougher than North London, but rough is
It's relative.
it's very
Yeah.
relative. It's
Yeah.
like, Manhattan versus Brooklyn or something.
Oh.
It's really not,
Yeah.
it's not Queens,
Right.
the seedier parts of Queens, but it's or the Bronx, but it's it's quite gentrified now. So
Interesting. I was curious because I was like, I'm betting you went there and wandered around and
yeah, I'm pretty sure I crossed a drug exchange.
Yep.
But that was the worst of it. And I just kind of pretended like I didn't see anything and kept going because I thought, I don't need to make eye contact with anybody doing anything illegal. I'm just going to keep going.
I am not witnessing anything. My blinders are on.
I see nothing.
That's right. Exactly. I'm a bad witness. That's the best place to be in those situations.
Absolutely.
And the other thing that I thought was quite brave of you was the full cast of characters. That is a lot of people.
It's the first time I've written 4. It was a lot. And 4 with more or less complete arcs. I mean, I knew Dorothy was going to be a limited character. So she just didn't have as much to her that I needed to go into as the other 3.
Yeah.
But I knew that Hera and Alice, I mean, were going to be my 2 main ones, which is funny because they didn't put the other. I had them in my initial cover copy. For people who were watching, you don't know, it's the write-up on the back of the book that's kind of the pitch to the readers, and I had all 4 characters, and marketing rewrote it to be just Lillian and Alice. So it's so funny because readers who've read it are like, how come Hera and Dorothy aren't on the cover? Marketing, they have their reasons. So
yes, they do.
Yeah.
Well, and it probably fits.
Yes.
That's the other part, right? Space.
It's better. For sure.
Geography is real on the back of a book. And Hera was such a wonderful, wonderful character.
Oh,
so
thank you.
Sweet. And her little dog. I was just right there along with her and Biscuit, Cusco. And I liked how the story flowed between their perspectives. So that when there was a intense scene or something big happening, it was counteracted by the innocence of Hera and Dorothy as well, which is really sweet. So I thought that they were great. And Dorothy is just, she's so kind. And she also, I loved that she delivered that extra layer of depth to what it might have been like to be a woman in the late 1920s of London. So including her point of view, was there a reason besides the connection with Hera?
Yeah, so my favorite thing to do, I've only just discovered this in my last couple of books about myself as a writer, is that it takes a while to figure out what you really like to do,
Oh, totally.
I like multiple perspectives, and I've written a couple of first person, single characters, and I'm actually working on another one that's first person single character, although it's dual timeline. But I really like to show different points of view because they add layers of truth to a situation that are different from each other. Absolutely. It's like if you have, 5 people on a crime scene, all 5 people pick up on different information.
Yes, exactly.
And that, we've seen that a million times in all those law shows, right?
Yeah.
So I think there's something to that when you're talking about a historical period, a historical event. You're going to have, the more perspectives you have, I think the more complete the picture is of what's happening. And I love that they are all sort of counteracting each other. They're almost like antagonists to each other, but then they also end up, all of them at some point, working together.
Yes.
So, I read a fantastic book that does something similar that was so helpful to me. I was in the edits phase of this book, and it was like spaghetti, like octopus arms. I was having trouble making my way through it. And I finally actually started working with Scrivener, which I'd never used before, so that I could separate the 4 perspectives and move their chapters around very easily. But I read The Kitchen Front by Jennifer Ryan.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Which I love.
Yes.
It has 4 characters.
It does.
Which was so perfect because I was just in the middle of this. 4 characters that all are kind of striving for the same goal. So they are antagonists to each other, but just like mine, at some point or other, particularly near the end, they all sort of meet each other and overlap in their stories. So Dorothy was, her perspective as someone working in a shop that was being robbed.
Yeah.
And she was being set up by them as well. I just thought that was a really interesting side of the story.
Absolutely. I agree. It does. It rounds it out. Now that you say that, I'm like, oh, right. She was there. She was,
and then she had the key in the storage room, and then the girl that was a 40 elephants that worked there.
Yes.
So there's all of that. She was a victim of all that stuff.
Yeah.
And yet she had her own passion too. Like, she had somewhere to go after that. So
which is nice. Yeah, exactly. That makes sense. Yes, absolutely. And it's also, it kind of created again another sense of found family, and that idea that family isn't just what you're born into or just what you find once. It could be in different parts of your life, in different shapes and forms.
Absolutely. That's a common theme in my books too. I didn't realize that it's popped up a couple times. I'm like, does this have anything to do with my own life, perhaps?
Right. It's funny, isn't it?
It's so typical of writers to do that. There's themes that we circle around because of who we are and our own experiences. And that's definitely one that comes up in mine a lot. So,
and it takes several books to get there, to sort of to twig on it, that you go, hang on, I write about families in different ways. Why do I do that?
Right? Yeah. How come all the mothers are terrible in all of my books? They're either dead, non-existent, or they're awful. So I decided I need to write a really lovely, perfect mother.
Yes.
Very soon. I don't think I have yet, but very soon.
But I also think that it's that probably as a female, like as a daughter, we have that just desire to sort out the different relationships in family. Like a family is like ripe for all kinds of chaos and emotions that don't necessarily have logic attached to them.
Nope.
Which is really awesome. So speaking of family, Ruth's character. Yeah, that's a tough one. She deals with domestic abuse, and you did a very, very good job of giving all those perspectives on it. And I thought it was really interesting because I came away feeling the same way that I probably feel in life, where you had Lillian and Hera and Alice all trying to make sense of it. And there wasn't really an answer to how do you make sense of such a situation.
Or why the abused continue to go back to the abuser. And it's we know from psychology and this being actually a more a topic that's talked about more these days.
Yeah, definitely.
We know that it is about it's almost like they're hostages to their childhood.
Yeah.
And they end up seeking out what they know and reliving their past. We all do that to some degree. We relive our pasts until we break the cycle and understand what our issues are, right? Yeah. And we heal and all that stuff. But so yeah, I it was impossible to write about gang life and about street life in the 20s during a recession in the poor parts of London without getting into domestic abuse. It was very prevalent. And so I thought, if I bring in this character that is sort of the linchpin that sets Diamond Annie off.
Yes.
And Lillian.
Yeah.
So both of them really in different ways, that I think I really wanted to make sure I took it from an angle that felt authentic. And I'll tell you, have you seen the show Maid or The Maid that's on Netflix?
No, I have not seen it yet. It's on the list.
It's fascinating. It's very good. It's sad, but it has a really good, hopeful ending. And the acting is phenomenal. And I had watched that actually while I was writing this. And I think that helped me. It helped me think about abuse in a different way. It's all about this girl who leaves her abuser, and she has a very young daughter, and she has nothing. She has a car, but no job and no money. And she keeps trying to get help from the system, but the system is so convoluted that she can't even receive the help. Yep. And it's very circular. Like, you can't get this job unless you have a license. You can't get your license unless you have a job, stuff like that. It's a nightmare. And then just the psychology of the abused is really well portrayed in that show. So this is what we do as writers, isn't it? Yeah. So that's part of our research as we look into these things. And again, I didn't mean to find that. I actually was on a flight somewhere. I had downloaded it because people kept talking about how good it was. I downloaded the episodes and I started watching them on a plane headed somewhere. I thought, I'm stuck here. I may as well give it a shot. And I was riveted. And it was so crazy how I was working on that same thing at that time. I feel like that's common, isn't it? Those things need come to us while we're working on a project.
Totally. I think because we all of a sudden open up a piece of our brain that goes, okay, the funnel's open. I'm ready to understand this part of X.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's pretty cool, actually, because I think the more that you create and the more that you stay in that creative realm, the more you're open to. And then you see it play out sometimes in real life, sometimes in movies, sometimes in other books. It's really fascinating.
It really is.
Yeah, it's like kind of like they say there's no new ideas. They're all regurgitated, but ideas are shaped from the lens that you view them from. And so they're all different because they're still, the parameters are different for each one. So it's amazing. It's magical, actually.
It is magical.
That's my favorite part. or when history and the storyline, the fictional storyline, meet up so well that you're like, I couldn't have planned that.
I know, and it's one of those magical moments for sure.
Totally. So I give kudos to you for addressing domestic abuse in the story and also making it real and the grappling with it real as well, because I think that's what we do.
Yeah.
Until we go round and round in circles until we can figure it out. And I think, like most very difficult situations, there's more than one way to come to a resolution. But you never know what it is until you're in it.
Yeah.
So, and I love all the little historical nuggets that pop up. And so what I think you've said is that like domestic abuse was rampant. And so you included that. Was there any other some nugget that you were like, yes, this has to go in no matter what?
Well, definitely the World War I, the trafficking in the parks. I wrote a book about the 4 years of World War I, like the entire scope. And so I did so much research about it and never, ever came upon that information. So that was fascinating to me. But so much. I mean, so much. I'm really interested, appalled. I have to say, I'm actually really appalled by British colonization of India. I love Indian culture. I love the food. I love the beautiful colors of everything.
Vibrant.
I've got several friends who are Indian, and they're lovely people, very open about sharing their culture with you. It's a place it's on my bucket list. I have not been. And so, when I was thinking about Hira, my 10-year-old character, I thought, I really want to bring this element of British colonization on the page in some way, because many Indians were moving to the UK at this time, and I don't see it in anything. I've seen it on a couple of BBC series where there's, people going to India.
Yeah.
In the 19th century, but you don't see it in any books, really. Not any novels,
true.
I should say. Not any. I'm sure there's plenty of nonfiction about it, but so I just thought, there was a thriving Indian community in London at this time, East London in particular, but in other parts too. So I was, I wanted to look at that and think about what it would be like for a girl whose father was a British foot soldier, who was white, and then the Indian mother from a silk weaving town in Gujarat, and what that would mean for her as she leaves her wealthy home and is out on the streets.
And the friends that she makes along the way is pretty sweet.
Yeah. So that was an unexpected. I knew I was interested in that area, but I wasn't positive I was going to go in that direction at first. And then I started reading about it, and I was there. I could hear her voice in my head before I could hear Time and Annie's.
Oh, interesting.
Isn't that funny?
Yeah, I love that. Because her voice is really clear. In the story, it's very clear.
I could have just written her story, to be honest.
Yeah, it would have been.
I loved your chapters. They were my favorite to write. I mean, I loved all of them. I love all 4 characters. You can't not love your characters, right?
Yeah.
I really love Alice. But Hira's chapters were probably the most fun for me to write. They have a Dickensian feel. Her entire existence in the book has a bit of a Dickensian feel, because I love Dickens, and I think that shows. An orphan on the run.
Oh,
in the slums. That's so very Dickensian. You see Oliver Twist in your head, among other books.
Absolutely. As soon as you say that, my brain goes to the wintry scene in the novel, and I go, oh yes, yep, totally get that. But what's really cool though is that I wouldn't have come up with that on my own unless you had said something. That's why it's always interesting to see where an author's brain was at while they were working on something, because it adds so much depth to a story.
Well, and it's delightful when someone picks up on it. They're like, oh my gosh, this has,
Totally.
Okay, I made it. I did it. But everybody picks up on different things, which is also fun.
Always. Isn't it? Sometimes people pick up on things that I didn't even know was in there.
Yeah.
And
that happens to me.
Wow.
I'm like, oh yeah, I wouldn't have thought about it that way. But they're right.
Yes. I mean, a book is only yours while you're working on it, and then when you release it into the world, it's everybody else's.
That's absolutely true.
So I love that. It's pretty cool. So if you're touring, like you went to London and toured it.
Yes, I went to London a couple of times. Yeah.
Did you?
Yeah.
All in the name of research.
All in the name of research. I mean, I had to go back to the Borough Market and eat meat pies. And,
absolutely.
All that stuff. So.
I love that, because I think it creates an immersive setting, and the setting ends up being part of the character, right? I love that. So yes, good job. I love it.
Oh, thank you.
I'm going to hold up this beautiful cover again, because everybody should see it. This should be on your next read list. So good. You won't put it down. I was like I had a writing deadline, I think, at the same time. And I was like, yeah, no, we're going to read
some more. That makes me happy. I distracted you.
You totally distracted me. Totally. It was great. So can you tell us what's up for you next? I know that a little bit, but.
Yes. Okay. Stuff. So my next solo book is 2026. So I don't have a book coming out next year, which I've had a very tight production schedule, because due dates got compounded with the pandemic, and then we had family emergency. So like all of a sudden it was like bam, 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 bam. So I'm actually delighted to just write next year and maybe go to a couple of book festivals, that kind of thing.
Nice.
So 2026, my solo book is about the last woman who owned the Hope Diamond, and who was a socialite, really well-known socialite in the DC area, and who was absolutely wild, just wild. A thrill seeker, an addict, big spender, almost, she had $100 million or something and went through almost her entire inheritance.
Holy crow.
But then we also have a fictional jeweler who wants to take care of her jewelry collection and the Hope Diamond. And she becomes kind of obsessed with this idea of a curse. And she also has a tragedy. So people say the Hope Diamond's cursed, and then luck comes with it, and you get to make the judgment for yourself if it really is cursed or not, both in my socialite's life and in my fictional jeweler's life. So
that's good.
Yeah, so it's fun. It's I'm writing it a bit like it's a suspense novel, and that I have the present day is 1919, and then I jump back 6 months, not terribly far, but 6 months before, and unravel parts of the story, and I drop these mystery questions in it. So that's the goal. Right now it's a mess because that's normal for first draft, but so that's my solo title. But coming October 22nd with Hazel Gaynor, my sometimes co-author, who I call my book wife.
Good choice for a wife.
We have our fourth collaboration called Christmas with the Queen. And it is a novel set during the early reign of Queen Elizabeth II. So 1952 to 1957. Fun. And it is about a royal chef and a correspondent to the royal family, or to the BBC. And they meet in the halls of Sandringham, where the royal family celebrates Christmas. And they have a past, and you see it play out over 5 Christmases. And of course, Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip and the royal family are coming through the story and in the background and all around. So
that's
a lot of good historical stuff. A lot of just it's Christmassy. There's love. I think it's the perfect antidote to an election fall.
No kidding.
So it's probably the lightest book we've written, although we always have a little bittersweet element mixed in.
Absolutely.
So we're very excited about the book. The cover is gorgeous. We haven't shared it yet, but if you know where to look, it's actually already out there. We just haven't splashed it everywhere. So if you're watching this, you can go check it out.
Go check it out. It's a hard thing to keep under wraps when you're trying to, pre-production things.
Yeah, well, so I've been promoting Queens of London, and then Hazel had a paperback release of The Last Lifeboat out last week, and then
another great
she has
novel.
some other announcement for her book out next year, another week. So then after that, we're going to share the cover and all the buy links and all that. So
that'll be fun. And October's perfect for Christmas.
It is, and it's late October.
Late October. So, okay. Excellent.
People will start thinking holidays are coming.
Yes.
And they will have Halloween on the brain a little bit, but that's okay.
Only those that really, really get into Halloween.
Well, and when your kids don't do it anymore, it's
it's a non-event when you don't.
Yeah.
Yeah. When you don't have to, dress people up.
Yeah. Or you live in a neighborhood and not a place that's not really a neighborhood.
Yeah.
We don't
nobody walks up the door. Exactly.
I have a half-a-mile driveway. No one's going to come up my driveway.
Only if you're giving out the full-size chocolate bar.
Right. Here's a bag of candy, kids.
Right?
Yeah. So that's it.
That's pretty cool. That is really fun. I'm looking forward to the Christmas with the Queen. I think it's actually really timely as well, because she would have had her birthday just the other day. And it's a funny thing. I mean, I'm Canadian, so we have a innate tie-in with the royal family. I grew up singing "God Save the Queen" in school and things like that. Yeah, we're tied in. And actually, when I was doing some research, I had to dissect it myself and found out that the Queen, our now King, is actually head of our military. And I was like, wait a minute. hang
Yeah.
on.
What about the prime minister?
Yeah,
You know?
well, we vote these people, like, not that
Yeah,
we,
yeah. Isn't that interesting?
So I
Because we're
thought, yeah,
Commonwealth, right?
because
We're
we're a
part of the
Commonwealth.
Commonwealth.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So but she's a figure that I miss.
I honestly do too, and I'm not the least bit British, but I've always enjoyed following the royal family, and not in the crazy tabloid way, but
Yeah,
just
no,
as a historian. I mean, I'm not a
yeah,
true historian, but we're casual historians, and
yeah,
I follow that for that. And she was such
yeah,
a really prominent figurehead, and I
yeah.
historic like made huge change over her reign as well.
Little
So it's
bit by little bit, and it was just this. I love that it was just those small steps that brought the world together in those ways. Like
yeah,
it's
yeah.
yeah, yeah. She was a force in a quiet way.
She was. She
Yeah.
was. Yeah.
Yeah, she did the job well. That's for sure. Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? So yeah, I think I find myself like when I'm making tea or something, I'll be thinking about the Queen. I'm like, really, you didn't know her? So, but it is an interesting thing. So what do you have? My last question for you is, what have you read lately? Or what are you reading now that you would like readers to know about? Because our TBRs aren't big enough yet.
Yes. Okay. So I always have to look at my list, because the minute I am asked this question, like I don't read 5, 6 books a month, it just goes right out of my head like I don't read, which is so funny. Wrong Place, Wrong Time by Jillian. Let me just see what her last name is. I'm not seeing it come up right away, but it's actually a suspense novel, but it's kind of like women's
Okay.
fiction too. It was actually a Reese Witherspoon pick a
Okay.
while ago, and it's an English author, and it's really really well written, and it's a time loop. So she goes back in time, and it's kind of like Groundhog Day, but not. She's not waking up at the same day. She wakes up a day before, and then the day before that, and then
Oh, like
weeks before
reverse
that, and maybe
chronological.
months before. And she goes back in time like 5
Oh,
years or 7 years or something to unravel the mystery of this tragedy that has happened in the opening pages. And so
oh,
it's a lot about her motherhood, and it's gripping, and it's very well written. So I definitely recommend that. And I would say
okay.
the Mostly True Story of Tanner and Louise by Colleen Oakley, which is wonderful. It's very funny and upbeat. I don't know if you've read that, but the audiobook's wonderful.
Oh,
It's
okay.
an 80-year-old woman and a 20-something who has injured herself and can't go back on her soccer scholarship to college. So she's sort of, her wheels are spinning, and they can't stand each other, and their lives come together because of circumstances, and there's a little bit of a mystery mixed in, but it's a humorous, lovely book, so I highly recommend it
Oh,
too.
I will write that down too, because I'm always looking for audio, because I try to keep an audiobook going at the same time as reading everything else, because
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
it's
I
a
do
time
too.
saver.
You just get through more, and all
You
that. So.
do. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I agree. And funny enough, laundry still needs to be done, and dishes and cooking
Yes,
and
I get
something else.
more cleaning done if I have an audiobook on, I'll tell you that.
Right? Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I'll walk further.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Just one more chapter, right? Like it just,
Yeah.
yeah. That's too funny. Well, thank you so much for joining us. It's always a pleasure to chat with you. And I love this novel. I really, really love this novel.
Thank you so
And
much.
I didn't know that you could do better than, it's not even better. It's not better. It's just, it's different.
It's different.
Equally as stunning, because the next year poem as you know, was just like, it just totally got my heart. But this is in a different way, just as fabulous, because it
Thank
just,
you.
I love something a little bit fast paced, and
Yeah,
you
sure.
know,
Same. I want to be taken on an immersive journey, and
wow,
I want it I want the book to move. So yeah, I
exactly,
try to write books that move. So I
exactly.
love to hear all that. Thank you.
Yes, it was so great. Thank you for sharing it with us, and thank you for chatting as well. It's always good to
Of
see you.
course. Always good to be here. So
So, friends, if you're looking for your next read, historical fiction, Queens of London by Heather Webb. You definitely do not want to miss this one. Thank you so much. Until next time, happy reading, everyone.
Bye.
Let's see if I can click the right button.